Hi everyone, my name is Kathy and I'm going to show you how I made this needle felted otter. Like most needle felted sculptures, it all starts with wire. I wrapped 18 gauge wire with pipe cleaners and then used a reference picture I'd found online as a template to create the basic skeleton. The pipe cleaners make the wire a little more comfortable to work with, and they also help the wool adhere to the skeleton when I start wrapping it. I used one main wire to go from the tip of the tail to the head, and then I used one for the front legs and one for the back legs. Once I had the main wire structure in place, I manipulated it a bit to take on the basic pose that I'm going for. For this sculpture, I wanted the otter to be swimming, so I looked up reference photos of swimming otters and manipulated the skeleton a bit so I could better picture the final pose. When I was happy with the skeleton, I started to build it up with wool, wrapping it around the wire and then felting it down to secure it. I wrapped the whole thing in an initial layer of wool so that it kind of resembled a sausage with legs. Slowly, I began to add small amounts of wool in areas where the otter is thickest, such as the shoulders, hind legs, neck, and midsection, leaving the legs bare for now. I also added a tiny little snout to his head, which will act as a base for his nose, mouth, and muzzle. Once I had the body built up, I started making the feet. I took tiny bits of brown carded wool and soaked them in regular school glue, then wrapped it around 24 gauge wire to create one teeny little toe. I then proceeded to make 19 more of those, and when they were finished, twisted 5 of them together to create a single foot. After that, it was time for a pedicure, which is always fun. I trimmed the ends of the wires just past the toes to create his claws. I repeated that process 3 more times and ta-da, I've got 4 little feet ready to attach to their owner. Oh wait, one more thing. To make them more webbed looking, I added tiny amounts of wool in between the toes. Next, I put the feet aside for a bit because I wanted to work on the face. It's always fun to see the character of the animal emerge, and I find it keeps the momentum going. First, I poked holes in his face with an awl and inserted small glass eyes. Sometimes I make eyes with wool, and sometimes I use glass eyes. It really depends on the animal. Then I started applying small amounts of brown wool for the first layer of his face. It looks kind of weird at first, but it's important to trust the process and to do this step slowly and lightly so as not to build up too much bulk. I kept adding layers of wool, using a lighter brown color to build up his brown forehead. Then it was time for his nose, mouth, and cheeks, which gave him instant character. Once that was done, I added another highlighting layer of wool above his eyes and on his cheeks to give the face even more contrast, and then I smoothed it out all over. I can spend hours on a face, tweaking it here and there to get just the right expression. The tiniest shift of wool or feature placement can make a surprisingly huge difference and change the expression completely, and I won't move on until I feel I've gotten it as good as I possibly can. Back to his body for a bit. I applied pieces of brown wool all over and started felting them down. I wanted the otter to have a sleek look as he's meant to be underwater, so I'm using the flat felting method for him, which just means I'm felting carded wool directly down in flat layers. This creates a smoother look rather than a fluffier look. The next video I have coming out, a fox, will show the process of fur planting, which creates that fluffy, furry look. So that the otter will eventually have a range of different colors instead of just one, and to add to the realism of the piece, I added some darker brown wool to his hind leg area and part of his lower back, and some very light beige wool to his stomach. It's roughly applied for now, but will be smoothed out later on. Next, I attached the feet, which I did by placing the finished foot against the leg wires and wrapping the wool around them to join them together, then felting them in and building them up with more wool. I did this for all of them except for the front left wire. I left that one uncovered because that's what's going to be inserted into my base to support the otter and give the illusion that it's suspended. So for that leg, I just felted it on separately. Then I made the ears by folding a small piece of wool and felting it in the middle and all around to create a round shape with a kind of hole in the middle. I left a tuft of wool on one side, which I used to attach the ear to the head, and then I added a tiny bit of loose wool around it to blend it in and make it look like it's being pressed flat against the head. Finally, it was time for my favorite part, smoothing the surface. I always feel a bit of relief at this stage because I'm finished the hardest bits, which to me are the feet and the face, and I can move on to the more meditative process of continuous light stabbing. This part takes a while, but it's so satisfying and fun to see it slowly smoothing out. Okay, the otter is done, but I'm not going to reveal him quite yet because once he was finished, I still had to make his base. Here's the board I went with, which I was happy with because it came from my current collection that I've been building and wasn't a new purchase. So what I did was took a piece of core wool and started felting it down until it resembled kind of a flat blob with uneven edges. I wanted it to be uneven to kind of match the unevenness of the board. So it really didn't matter what exact shape I ended up with, as long as it was basically an elongated oval and it fit onto the surface of the board. Then I made my seaweed, or I guess in this case, river weed. I took pieces of combed wool tops, also known as roving, and saturated them with regular school glue, then smoothed them out with my fingers until they became long, thin strips. This was the messiest process ever, but it produced the effect I wanted, which, once dried, was stiffened strips of wool that would stand upright and not droop over. I felted the fluffy end of the strips onto the flat wool blob that I made earlier to secure them at an angle to make it appear as though they were flowing in the river current. Then I put a generous amount of glue onto my wooden base, pressed the wool with weeds attached down on top of it, mixed sand with glue to form a kind of cement, and applied it all over the wool and around the weeds to make it look like the bottom of a river. I even added a few little river rocks. I left it to dry overnight and I really love the effect. I unfortunately don't have any footage of the process of attaching the otter to the base, but I basically just drilled a hole through the sand and into the wood once it dried and inserted the main arm wire into it, using super glue to make sure it was extra secure. The very last thing I did was attach whiskers onto my otter, using a long piece of invisible thread and sewing it back and forth through his snout a few times, then trimming off the ends. And now it's time for the final shots. I absolutely love how this piece turned out, and I'm excited to make more animals that appear to defy gravity. The next video I have coming out is my fox, and I'm making it look like he's diving into the snow, so if you're interested, please tune in to see how that one turns out. I've got lots of videos planned for after that, including longer step-by-step tutorials and shorter ones like this one. So if you're new here and you'd like to see more, don't hesitate to subscribe. And as always, if you're a returning viewer, thank you for watching and supporting my channel. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, take care.